like, Nell, are you cuckoo bananskis? What are you doing? I mean, why would you do this? And she said, because I want to. And because I want to, for a woman, is a radical statement, I think. To do something just because you want to like be at a Thanksgiving dinner and take the biggest turkey leg for yourself. Has any woman here ever taken the biggest turkey leg? No.
And there was just so much.
To the Harbor Grace excursion with the boys to have a time.
Hi, Liz.
Hi, Scaachi. Scaachi and I were just talking about how Scaachi is mistrustful of the moon. So
I don't trust the moon. I think it's bossy, and we have 2 of them right now, and I don't feel good about that.
I get that.
It rules my periods, as you know.
And many, and moods and many other
Precisely,
things.
like a wolf.
Tides.
Do you ever feel like because you write about women's issues that people kind of come to you and think you're going to have solutions for like 300 years of injustice?
Yes, but I do, fortunately.
Right.
I actually have all the solutions.
Hold on, let me get a clean page.
Which I'm going to share with you tonight. Yes, I do. And it's totally fine because I love talking about this stuff. What is more kind of disturbing to me is sometimes people come to me because they have a traumatic situation in their life. And I have to say, I'm not a counselor and I'm not a lawyer, and I really don't know all that much, and you should find a professional to talk to about this. But I do love talking about it, and not enough people talk about it, so I'm always happy to.
I'm curious why this book now, because I feel like it could come at any point, and it could come at any point in the future, but what was it about now that you thought, this is what I have to do this year?
Yeah, it was the fact that I think, when we kind of see in pop culture, you see feminism, you see Barbie making $1 billion at the box office, little girls in, the future is female t-shirts, get this idea of like, oh, everything's okay now, we're all good here, can wash our hands and go home. And the material reality on the ground is so different, and it is, we are far from parity, we are far from equality, and in many ways, women's rights are being rolled back across the world, including in North America. And it seemed a really powerful time to write this. Also, Stephanie Sinclair, who I think is here as the head of M&S, thought I should write this book. So I have to give Stephanie a major shout out.
So money, you were like, I need money. Yeah.
And now, actually, I can go on a around the world cruise and,
Right.
Buy a small hotel.
Yeah,
Because publishing is like
there's
that.
so much money in
so
publishing.
much money in publishing, yeah.
Everyone's very rich. I wanted to ask you about the Barbie movie. There's a chapter in there about the success of that movie. Despite the fact that it made $1 billion, it's not like we've seen an influx of movies directed by women or projects led by women. There's still a dearth of that. But women buy stuff. We buy so much stuff, and we buy a lot of art that's also made by other women. So it seems like this is something where the capitalistic argument is twinned with a social argument and an ethical argument, but it doesn't seem to be catching up.
Yes, so I think as in with many things, we're looking at a systemic problem rather than, and you and I can go and buy our books and we can buy our tickets to the movies, but if the systems aren't in concord, if the systems don't change in order to become more equitable, then all the individual action in the world isn't going to make all that much difference. And in fact, the New York Times just had a big story about a month or so ago saying that Barbie has had no effect on the number of women who are directing films. And in fact, it's really terrible for racialized women, for women of, from different underrepresented backgrounds. So Barbie right now is kind of an anomaly. Unfortunately, it was a great anomaly. I loved it. I don't like the backlash to it. It drives me a bit crazy because everybody's now like, it's not cool, it's not cool. But it was cool, it is cool.
What backlash didn't you like about
I think I hear all kinds of people who sort of say, oh, it wasn't as good, or it wasn't as subversive, or it wasn't as, yeah, and it's not as subversive. It's not, Chantal Ackerman, okay, fine. It's not Agnès Varda, fine. But it was a great movie that undercut so many of our notions in a very sly and funny way. The whole idea of the patriarchy being about horses and Ken being so distraught it's a beautiful metaphor, because I think what Greta Gerwig was trying to say is that the patriarchy does harm men. And when they find out, in the kind of emperor's new clothes, I think it is tearing at them as it tears at Ken when he finds out that, sadly, it's not all about horses.
It's not. Well, isn't it? I've always viewed it, because patriarchy is about
It's
horses.
about having a mojo dojo cat in the
Yes,
house, is
yeah.
what it's about.
Feminism is about the moon, patriarchy is about the horses. But I guess I'm trying to understand, even just for myself, if it does make money, why don't they just let us make stuff?
Well, that's a very good question. That one made a lot of money, and maybe they would look at, and the other interesting thing is, the Wonder Woman movies made tons of movie money too, and Patty Jenkins is not invited back to make Wonder Woman 3. Why is that? I have no idea. I think things kind of snap back to the way they've always been, because it is easier that way and it's more comfortable that way. And maybe the people who made the Barbie, well, they're actually making a Polly Pocket movie, though. Now, I'm not sure Polly Pocket is the feminist icon for the 21st century, but I guess we'll find out.
I wouldn't have guessed Barbie
I have
been.
to, at this point, just a tiny aside, which is to say, many wonderful men out there who, engaging with their children and things. I'm married to a wonderful man who, to this day, is scarred by having to try to put Polly Pocket's tiny rubber dresses on Polly. It's not easy. And so props to all the men out there who played with their sons and daughters with Polly Pocket.
Good for you guys.
Good for you guys.
All three of you who appear to be here today. In that chapter, you talk about kind of the lack of Oscar, or just award show recognition, frankly, for Greta Gerwig and for the kind of female side of that team. Obviously, Gosling got a nomination, which is like an incredible irony, considering.
It is like it was like Saturday Night Live writers wrote reality for us. Like, oh, really? Ryan Gosling gets a nomination, but not Greta Gerwig, not Margot Robbie. Okay, fine. Yeah.
I guess I wonder sometimes, I think about this often with race, where do I want to seat at a table that is not built for me?
Yeah.
Do I want to sit at a table that is a boys' club or full of white people? Why do I want that? And I guess I wonder this sometimes about stuff like this, where should Greta Gerwig want that? Like, or is it about building a different table entirely?
I would want that if I were Greta Gerwig, when she's gone, hopefully in 100 years from now. What are people going to remember? That she won this Oscar, she won this Oscar? It is unfortunate. Until we build our own table, we have to sit at the table that tries to exclude us. And as Kim Campbell, I'm going to drop Kim Campbell's name now, told me in an interview a few years ago, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And
such a good line.
I think it's very, very true. So until we build our inclusive table, and the inclusivity is not just a fundamental part of it, but I think the most fundamental part of it, we have to sit with, the people who are picking their noses and like grabbing across the table. And we have to make room for ourselves there.
Yeah. You mentioned your family, you mentioned your husband, and you write in the book about how more men have to lean out of the workplace so that women have more space at work, and so that their wives and the women in their lives can be at work more. I'm curious about the space you negotiated within your family to write this. Did your husband have to lean out a little bit? Did you have to tell him, move?
He actually wrote the book for me.
That's so nice.
I know. Thank you, Doug. He was very, very, very helpful, and he read drafts, and he's, I've been very lucky. I think he also has been very lucky that we found each other, because he really is a true 50%, more than 50% often partner. What's interesting to me, and I write about this in the book, in the sort of pay gap section, is, I don't know if some of you have read Claudia Goldin's work on pay equity, and she won the Nobel Prize in Economics last year, I think, for her work on pay disparities. And one of her major conclusions in her book, Work and Family, is that what is part of what is largely responsible for pay equity gaps is this idea of greedy work. So we live in an exploitative economic system. I don't think anybody's surprised by that. And if you're in a heterosexual partnership or queer partnership with children, one partner really can do greedy work. Your company wants you to take clients out for work, wants you to always be on call, wants you to be able to fly around the world. And if you have children, or if you are caring for other people in your family, the other partner can't really do that. And in our partnership, Doug was the foreign correspondent. I was not. The Globe and Mail did not pay me to be a foreign correspondent. And so he often had to fly around the world. The company wanted, that was the greedy work, right? And I think in this world, this is what we are living with. And what Claudia Golden says, and now I have to say when Doug was home, he was like 120% there. But what Claudia Golden says is that men need to lean in at work and tell their employers that they are not willing necessarily to do this much extra greedy work because your partners suffer. And you don't only suffer in terms of economic disparity in terms of wages. I, for example, went down to part-time work. But you suffer in wealth accumulation over the course of your life, which is why women end up with less wealth at the end of their lives, because they often have to go part-time or they take time out to care, and then they end up with smaller pensions as well. So it becomes kind of a big snowball, except it's the opposite of the snowball, because you're losing, not gaining. That's what happened in our particular house, and it was a really instructive lesson for me to write about that, because exactly what she wrote about had happened to us.
Are there other things that men need to do to kind of create more equity in the workplace? Are there things they can be responsible for so that we're not fucking doing it all the time?
Yes, absolutely, 110%. All kinds of things from, let's take the issue of caring and being carers. Women do most of the caring in this society, both paid and unpaid. Unpaid, men do more caring, definitely, than they used to do, and that's fantastic, but the vast majority of it is still shouldered by women. Men can also go into professions like early childhood education.
They can? They let them do that now?
Shocking. There was actually no, believe it or not, there's no woman-shaped hole that you have to walk through to become an early childhood education worker. And if more men entered professions like that, then we would see the wages for those professions go up. I mean, one of the reasons now that we have daycare, this fantastic daycare program that has been brought in, but it is problematic across the country because they can't find enough early childhood education workers. And why can they not find enough early childhood education workers? I think we know, because they do not pay them very well, because care is gendered and care is considered to be less valuable than other work in society. You may be surprised to learn that early childhood education workers do not make the same as, let's say, bankers or lawyers, although I would argue that they do more important work.
Yeah, I remember my banker so fondly. I feel like we are like quasi post-pandemic, sort of.
Yeah.
Do you feel like the pandemic caused a regression for women, or do you think it helped us push forward? I mean, I'm curious if you think what kind of strides we made and perhaps maybe what we didn't.
Yeah, I'm not an economist, so I'm not, like, the data seems very unclear to me. At the beginning of the pandemic, we were calling it a she-session, and economists like Armin Yalnizyan did good work on what the she-session.
That sucks, I hate it.
I know.
So
but it was women who were in gig work and part-time work and things that were shut down that who were harmed by it. I think what we have to ask is, what did that do in terms of care and institutional care? So I talked to a bunch of care workers and nurses in the book, and what struck me was that nursing and being a personal care worker are very gendered. More than 90% of nurses in this country are women, and probably that number of personal care workers as well. And my mom was a nurse, and nurses have been taught since the dawn of time to be quiet, essentially, not to advocate for themselves, not to be outspoken, not to be loud. As one of the nurses I interviewed in the book said, we're supposed to be nuns, just sitting quietly, like by a bedside. And what happened was, through the pandemic, they were so horrified at what they were seeing. They were so horrified at the lies that were being told by politicians about how everybody had, enough PPE to go around and that everything was fine in the long-term care homes. And they became really vocal, and they became advocates, and they actually started being astonishingly placed alongside doctors as experts in this field. So that's one thing, I think, that happened during the pandemic that I find super, super hopeful, is this kind of loud outpouring from nurses, many of whom unfortunately left the profession because I think it was shockingly difficult thing to have to do.
You also write about this. This is something I think about a lot, so it was interesting to read about how little some men think about women's issues when they vote, or when they think about how they have to vote, or when they think about what a politician is saying. And it feels like we really need men to vote with us and for us. So how do we get them to view things that they traditionally view as just for women, child care, abortion access, things, women's health generally speaking? How do we get them to view this as imperative for them to care about when they think about it in a political action space?
How do we convince them happy wife, happy life?
How do I get them to give me something? Yes.
It's really interesting. I will say, go back to my comment about patriarchy, and I'm going to quote Bell Hooks because I always quote her because she's a genius, but also in one of her books, she said about boys in particular, she said, the patriarchy will not heal them. If it did, they would all be well. And we know they're not well. We know that men are suffering from a loneliness epidemic, they're suffering from mental health epidemics, high rates of suicide and things like this. So the system we've built, which fucks us over, also fucks them over. And I'm sorry, I'm allowed to say fuck in the library.
I already
so
said it
sorry.
twice, so I don't, yeah.
Oh, my most sacred,
It's in my contract,
temple here.
yeah. Yeah.
So we convince them by having them recognize that what is in our best interest is also in their best interest. And a more just, fair society will not just benefit, the people who are their sisters, wives, mothers, daughters, friends, but themselves as well, because we all benefit from a more equitable society. But we conceive of political power in particular. It's very male-coded. As they say in the book, if you close your eyes, do a little experiment, close your eyes or don't close your eyes, but think, if I say to you, politician, picture a politician. Have we all pictured a politician? Do we picture a female politician, or do we maybe picture, I don't know, Pierre Trudeau, Ronald Reagan, Charles de Gaulle, whatever?
Mine's just a stick figure. No elbows.
It's less than 100 years than we've been considered legal persons in this country. It's really I know. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but also so much good news in this book. There's lots of
there
good
is
news.
a lot of good news.
Lots of laughs, lots of yucks, lots of hope.
Yeah. Well, you wrote about all the hope you had for Olivia Chow, which was like...
I know,
which was
so happy.
Nice to read. And I'm curious how you feel about her now.
Oh, I think she's fantastic. Yeah. I think she declared, okay, so she and I were kind of similar, Olivia and I, although we've never met, because we both grew up partly in St. Jamestown down here. Both of our fathers were, our mothers were in abusive relationships. And so I followed her career very closely. She rides a bike, I ride a bike. I love the way she dresses. I love everything about her. And I love her policies. And earlier this year, City Council, with her urging, declared intimate partner violence an epidemic, which it is, and which, if you talk to any advocate in this country, or anybody who knows anything about intimate partner violence will tell you that it's an epidemic. And you know who has not declared it an epidemic? Doug Ford. Thank you. Somebody said Doug Ford. Thank you.
If you say it one more time, he will show up.
Well, he might learn something if he did.
Maybe.
So the NDP right now has a bill that is trying to, declare intimate partner violence an epidemic. The Ford government has very reluctantly supported it, but it's sort of stalled, and they want it to go back to committee to be researched again. If any subject in this country has been studied, I won't say to death because that's a terrible, but it's studied overly, any subject we know the things we should be doing, it is domestic or intimate partner violence, and we don't do any of the things that we need to. We do some of them, but not nearly enough.
Yeah. It feels like Olivia had this problem too, and most female politicians do, which is that we end up talking about are they likable over and over again, and then we can't really appropriately adjudicate whether or not they do a good job or if they have policies that we like. So like, can we criticize female politicians if that is the place that we're starting from?
100%. We can, absolutely. We can criticize Danielle Smith like up the wazoo. go right ahead. Knock yourselves out. Seriously. And we need to get to a place though where, okay, so I'll ask another thought experiment. How many premiers do we have who are women? One. There's one. There's one premier who's a woman right now. 6 or 7 years ago, I think there were 6 premiers who were women. You could argue that being a premier is the most powerful political office in this country, and we have one now who's a woman. Kate Graham wrote a great book called No Second Chances about how no female premier has been reelected after for a successful second term. Christy Clark was, but then something weird happened with the government, and I can't remember what it was. But no other female premier has been.
Why? Why do you think?
There's a lot of reasons for it, some of which I get into the book. There's this idea of what's called imperiled leadership. Sylvia Bashevkin, the U of T political scientist, talks about this, that women tend to be appointed to the heads of political parties when those parties are in trouble. Brian Mulroney, Kim Campbell, and if you're become the head of a party that's faltering or is unpopular, you might not get reelected. But also, I think we just, there's more research in the book about, we like to think we're all very cool and like we vote for policies, but there's good research to show that about 20% of Canadians hold pretty deeply negative ideas about women in political leadership, which is a lot, right? That's 1 in 5.
That's a lot.
That is a lot, yeah. So there have been, as Kate Graham in her book says, there have been more premiers named John or George than there have been women. Yeah.
Jesus Christ. Do you think women are staying out of politics or out of public life because of harassment, because of this sort of unfair critique over how they look, or she's a lesbian, or where are her kids, or, is that keeping us out of those rooms? Yeah,
I think it is, and it's sad, but I also see why. So Equal Voice Canada, which is this group that's devoted to trying to get more women, especially more racialized women and women from the margins, into political life, did a really good survey of young women, and they were asked, can you see life for yourself in public life, in public office? And most of them said no. And there were a bunch of good reasons. No work-life balance, which is true. But one of the other main reasons was this idea that they were a little bit afraid of both actual violence and online violence, which does disproportionately affect women in public life, in politics, and, you're not going to be surprised to hear this, in journalism.
Really?
Yeah, I know. Shocking. I know. This has never happened to you. I know.
It's never happened to me. I did want to ask you about journalism, actually. Because obviously when you read a book and there's like little tidbits about media in it, you're like, ooh, delicious. But I was curious if you think we can really make sense of issues of race and gender and inequality across the board, income equality, whatever it is, if our newsrooms feel so unequal to people like us who work in them? How do we do that work if where we're working is like not quite there? I'm curious if you can kind of maybe contextualize some of your experiences that you talk about in the book around that.
There's still a gender imbalance at the top of newsrooms. So, for example, the newsroom that I used to work in at the Globe and Mail still has never had a female editor-in-chief or publisher.
What do they sometimes call the Globe and Mail?
Oh, the Globe and Old White Male. But nobody who works there ever says that. Never.
Just us.
But I would say that the problem of racial imbalance is worse. Like, there's just, the newsrooms in this country are so profoundly white, especially at the top. And unfortunately, we're in a period of retraction in the media right now, not a period of expansion. And so the problem, it's a really hard one to address because people aren't being hired really a lot. They're being fired and laid off, as we know. But if you don't have a media that looks like the people who watch it and read it, you are going to miss so many things. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because it becomes less and less meaningful to the people who are consuming that media. And then they don't want to consume it anymore. And then you end up with fewer readers and viewers. And so I'm not a pessimist, though, about Canadian media. I'm really not, because there's so many fantastic small outlets like the Narwhal and the Local and Tyee. There's a million of them across the country that are doing really exceptionally good work. And I think they actually are kind of better at like representing what the country actually looks like.
Is the key to pay more attention to smaller outlets like that so that
I think so.
Yeah.
That's where I get most of my good news from. It is, unfortunately, this is the other problem with the media, as people who study it will tell you, is a couple things, which is one is news aversion, so people stop paying attention because it doesn't feel relevant to their lives. And the other one is that it's become a commodity for the wealthy. So those of you out here who have a subscription or 5 subscriptions, you will know it costs a lot to consume high quality media. And it costs nothing to get, memes from your Uncle Stanley about like Donald Trump or whatever, and that's very cheap and easy to consume. And it's expensive to get, it's very much like food. It's expensive to get good quality, nutritious information, which is why I think, and a lot of journalists don't agree with me on this, but I think it has to be financed as a public good, the way we finance schools and parks and hospitals.
Yeah, it feels like it's gotten worse too with the way, the fact that you can't post an Instagram link anymore, and the difficulty in disseminating information now here.
Because Mark Zuckerberg needs to build his bunker in Hawaii, so
He deserves it. He's poor.
He's very, very, very poor. He needs another 20 compounds around the world.
You also wrote about when you left the Globe. You left that job. You'd been there a really long time.
500 years.
500 years.
527 years.
You look
sorry.
great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a picture of me in the attic. That's
There's like a picture of Dorian Gray. Like,
Yes.
this is why you look like this.
Yes,
and there's,
exactly.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But you wrote about how you weren't sure who you would be
Yes.
outside of it. Did you find out? Did you figure it out?
I'm happier. Yeah. Ooh. So it took a lot for me. It took many years, as Doug will tell you, of me talking and thinking about it and like agonizing, because it's a very good job. I had a very good job. I loved the people I worked with. But I had done it for 527 years, which was a long time. And I read this book in 2018, and I highly recommend it to any of you who are thinking about a career change. It's called Old in Art School by Nell Irvin Painter. So Nell Painter, you might know, is a really famous American historian, best-selling author. She taught at Princeton, I think it was. And she was at the top of her career, and she decided she was going to leave her job as a very well-paid, you know, acclaimed academic, and she was going to go back to art school at the age of 64. And this book was like a revelation to me. And all of her colleagues said to her, like, Nell, are you cuckoo bananskis? What are you doing? I mean, why would you do this? And she said, because I want to. And because I want to, for a woman, is a radical statement, I think. To do something just because you want to like be at a Thanksgiving dinner and take the biggest turkey leg for yourself. Has any woman here ever taken the biggest turkey leg? No. You give it to your kids, your husband, your mom, your dad, you know, your friends around the table. You never take the biggest turkey leg for yourself. Mm-hmm. And that's what this felt like. It felt like I just want to take a big turkey leg. And you know, I didn't make that much money at the Globe because journalists do not get paid well, but I make less money. But I'm definitely happier, and I'm glad Nell Painter led the way.
When I got a divorce, my mother asked me why I was doing it, and I said, because I want to. And she was like, how could that be?
Oh, that's so interesting. And how do you feel now that you've...
I make more money and I'm happier. You talk a lot about sort of how different pieces of inequality for women are tied in this continuum. It's all kind of related, which is such an interesting way to look at it, because I think sometimes we view it as these disparate pieces and we don't see how they all talk to each other. Do we societally, just as a group, have a vested interest in viewing all of this as isolated incidents? Violence against women is an isolated incident. This income equality over here is isolated. Why do we want to see it as split instead of viewing it as connected, and therefore something that can be like a domino effect? If we start to solve one, it'll all speak to each other.
Yeah. I think because if we see it as being connected, we're forced to recognize that we need to see it as being connected in order to change it. If we recognize it as being connected, then there is no excuse not to change it. And everything is connected. It's wild to me, like being sick. You know, I talk about medical misogyny in the book can lead to, you know, terrible outcomes in terms of like life, not only life expectancy, but poverty. Being the victim in a intimate partner violence situation also leads to poverty and to homelessness. All these things are connected to each other, and they're all connected to this idea which stems from the dawn of the patriarchy, that the default factory setting for human is male, and that women are kind of like an adjunct, a rib, an afterthought, and not quite fully human. And if then we recognize that everyone, and I keep saying women, but I mean also, I mean all genders. I mean people who are non-binary as well. I think we have to have equality for all gender, for trans people, for non-binary people, for cis people. But if we see things as being connected, and the other thing is that, again, we live in an exploitative economic system that benefits from us being separate from each other, so that we cannot sort of work together and we see this in the States, in their politics, how people are being divided from each other, people who should be their natural allies, being divided from each other because some other people stand to profit from it.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk to you about what today is, which is October 7th.
Yes, it's a very
tough
heavy day.
It's a very heavy day. And I'm curious if you have thoughts on how war and conflict, generally speaking, is a women's issue, and how this conflict in particular might be a women's issue.
Yeah, so I think many people in this audience are having dark and sad feelings today. I definitely was. What happened a year ago, you know, when Hamas invaded Israel and committed their acts of barbarity, was heinous, grotesque, unlawful, and should be punished. And what has happened in the years since is even worse. Oxfam just put out a report saying that I think it was something like 17,000 women and children have been murdered in Gaza. There are more child amputees in Gaza now than there have ever been in the history of the world. Some of those amputations were performed without anesthetic because they were performed in hospitals that had run out of anesthetic. It is women and children who are overwhelmingly harmed in war. We know this from like the dawn of time. Rape is a tool of war and has been since the dawn of time. Civilian casualties are how wars are won, essentially. And then the other thing we have to think about is, and I think this is the question you have to ask yourself constantly about everything, is who benefits? So who benefits? Arms manufacturers benefit. People who, have investments in arms manufacturers benefit. So I think if we can think of it, and in the rebuilding, women or children are going to be, shunted to the side. And we are stuck now with generations and generations and generations of hostility. And it makes me incredibly sad. I was, my first sort of forays, even before I was really a feminist, were as a pacifist, as a person who was anti-war. I marched when I was 14 and 15 against nuclear weapons, against cruise missile guidance systems. And to this day, and I cannot recommend enough that you all read Ursula Franklin on this topic about the intersection of justice, of technology, of feminism, and how essentially they all fit together. There's no peace without justice, and that means justice for all people of all genders, all ages, all races. That was a long answer.
It was
Sorry.
a good answer. Do you feel like Canadians take gendered violence seriously? I always
No.
felt like we moved on pretty fast from
No.
okay, go on.
No, 100%. No, we don't like it. No.
Why not?
Why not? It is. If you were to ask me, like, what's the biggest problem facing, it would be this issue of violence, because it is I can't describe how underreported, how little we know about the actual scope of the problem. So my colleagues Molly Hayes and Tavia Grant and I did a big series in 2022 about intimate partner violence. All three of us had been reporting on it for years. And we just kept saying things to each other like, this can't be right. Like, this figure can't be right. And it was. So for example, only 20% of women who experience partner violence reported to the police, and yet it is like one of the biggest issues that police face. So 80% of that is underwater. We have no idea how big the actual problem is. I was making a document as I was finishing this book called cleverly "As I Was Finishing This Book," and I wasn't even looking for things, but they would pop up on my feed. The number of families who were murdered across this country by the male head of the household was astonishing. And they would make headlines for a day or two, and then they would fade away because people don't connect all of these things together. 3 of the major acts of violence, mass violence in this country, were rooted in misogyny. I'm talking about the Portapique massacre, the Toronto van attack, and the Montreal massacre. And if you talk to anybody about it, anybody who's an advocate, they will say that one of the main areas we do not do enough work on is prevention. We just don't really even think about prevention, and how, so the tiny pots of money that go towards intimate partner violence, and they should go towards supporting people who are fleeing. And men absolutely are the victims of intimate partner violence as well. Not to the same extent and not to the same severity. But we do not look at all about how we could stop this happening in the first place. Teaching healthy relationships, for example, helping men with who might be experiencing kind of these feelings and tendencies, trying to divert that energy. We don't even have a national helpline for women who need help. All other countries have a number you can call. There's one in Ontario, and people call it, frankly, from across the country, but there's no plan. There is a plan. The government announced a plan about a year ago, but it's a drop in the bucket, and everybody's just a bit like, it's not going to do much at all.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we have to think about how to prevent it from the very beginning.
Mm.
But that involves a whole of society response. It involves thinking about how we live in a patriarchal society and how some people try to control the behaviors of other people because they have been taught that that is acceptable. And so we have to teach that it's not acceptable.
I have one more question, and then we're going to go to a Q&A, so this is your time to start thinking about what you want to ask. There better be questions. You wrote about a certain news anchor who dared to let her hair go gray.
Ah, yes, Lisa. I love Lisa.
And I have been thinking a lot about how physical appearance for women in particular is so tied to income. It's tied to how you're treated at work. You know, women who are fatter make less money than men who are at the same weight bracket. And clearly, Lisa couldn't keep her job because she didn't want to dye her hair anymore. So how do we uncouple our physical appearance where, you know, if you want to get whatever you want to get done or you want to look how you want, how do we uncouple that from work and from our value at work and how much money we make?
I know, it's wild. I think, now she has never said that she tied the gray hair thing to being fired.
We did.
We did, and Robin Doolittle, bless her, found an executive who had said that, and Lisa has also been very clear that, you know, she thinks that there's definitely ageism in the news media. You only have to look at your screens to see, are there any women with gray hair reading the news? There are not very many women with gray hair reading the news. So I talked about how I keep dyeing my hair and as a business decision, which is ironically how CTV Bell Media described firing her as a business decision. I went freelance and I thought to myself, I wish I could let my hair go gray, but I was not brave enough, and I thought I have to try to sell myself out there. And as you have just pointed out, we still think youth is beauty, is currency. And you cannot get away from that, unfortunately. And the consequences of that are that we are stuck in this ridiculous loop of, and I have no problem with anybody getting any individual work done. Get your work done, that's totally fine with me. But we are stuck in this crazy loop of, it's not enough now that women have to have rejuvenation. God forbid a wrinkle, creeps across your forehead at night. You have to prejuvenate now.
Yes.
You have to prejuvenate when you're 25 years old and banish.
I love it when a 25-year-old is like, it's preventative. I'm like, yeah, you look 40 for the next 20 years. If that was the goal, looks good.
To me, it makes me think of people who cut ahead of you in Toronto traffic to gain an extra 3 minutes.
This much.
Yeah, because you're going to die anyway. The Grim Reaper does not care if you've had Botox or not. We are all going to be in the coffin at the same time.
That's a really good place to end it. You're going to die no matter what you do.